The bitter irony was that the most beautiful piece of paper Elias had seen in 6 months belonged to the enemy. He found it tucked into the pocket of a lieutenant who had been caught trying to cross the frozen ravine, now merely a crumpled, blood-flecked statue of ice 50 yards from the foxhole. The lieutenant was dead, but the map was a masterpiece of precise cartography, detailing every forward observation post, every machine gun nest, and every minefield marker in their sector with chilling, meticulous accuracy. It was a cold, cruel ledger of how they were meant to die. But Elias wasn't looking at the front. He was looking at the reverse. The back was a smooth, untouched expanse of cream-colored paper, clean and dry, a pristine canvas amidst the universal filth of the front line. He hadn't written home in 3 weeks, not since the mud swallowed his last notebook, and the sudden, overwhelming need to communicate one final truth. A truth untainted by the operational lies and the forced optimism of censored mail drove the decision. He carefully smoothed the map across the damp, splintered floor of the post, the enemy's meticulously drawn kill zones facing down into the earth, their existence muffled by the wood. On the reverse side, on this foreign, potentially lethal document, he uncapped the slender, military-issue fountain pen he still carried and began to write. The ink, usually reluctant in the damp air, flowed perfectly, tracing delicate lines across the pale fiber. He had nothing left to lose, and perhaps everything left to gain. A final moment of intimacy purchased with the life of a man whose plans were now pressing against the cold dirt beneath him. The air tasted of wet rust and ancient coal smoke, but for this moment, hunched over the captured intelligence, Elias was simply a man writing a letter, trying to bridge the ever-widening gap between the violence he lived and the life he remembered. He addressed it to Clara, his younger sister. She was the anchor, the one who still saw him as a man studying poetry rather than a human capable of calculated violence. He deliberately avoided the usual platitudes. No talk of warm weather, no promises of swift victory, no mention of the rations. He began instead with the memory of the lighthouse near their childhood home, the way the foghorn sounded like a lonely whale calling out for a vanished ocean. "Clara," he wrote, the pen scratching softly, "I often wonder if the sound of silence here is louder than the thunder of the guns. Tonight, the silence is a deep blue ache. It pulls at the corners of my memory until I can almost smell Mama's lemon biscuits." The difficulty lay in conveying the depth of his isolation without frightening her. How could he explain that the most frightening thing about the war wasn't the explosive noise, but the unnerving efficiency with which men disappeared? He pressed his weight onto the pen, ensuring the ink didn't bleed through and touch the names of the enemy officers scribbled on the hidden side. That separation, the paper-thin boundary between love and death, seemed to encapsulate his entire existence now. He wrote about the simple beauty of the last star he had truly seen, unfiltered by battle smoke, and how he carried that light inside him, a fragile ember. He knew, with the cold certainty of a man who lives constantly on borrowed time, that this was his definitive statement. All the other letters had been rehearsals. This was the final performance, staged on the back of his own death warrant. He finished the first page, folding it carefully along a crease that thankfully ran nowhere near the enemy's forward artillery coordinates. The second page was harder. He needed to confess something, but not a transgression of the war, a transgression of the soul. He needed to apologize for the Elias that would eventually return home, or perhaps the Elias that wouldn't. He wrote, "They tell us here that precision is survival. We must know the exact grid coordinates of the threat, the exact velocity of the projectile, the exact timing of the patrol shift. But I find myself yearning for imprecision, for the glorious messiness of real life. I miss knowing that tomorrow is just a day, not a mathematical equation of risk." He paused, letting the silence of the post settle around him. Outside, the night patrol shuffled past, their footsteps muffled by the new layer of frost. He considered the sheer, meticulous detail of the map face down below his letter, the small red triangles marking sniper nests, the penciled trajectory arcs. That map represented an entire life philosophy based on absolute, calculated destruction. His letter, conversely, was a desperate plea for the preservation of fragile, unquantifiable sentiment. It was the eternal conflict, printed on two sides of the same sheet. As he stared at the words, a profound realization hit him about the nature of survival and memory. When faced with the absolute end, what does a person choose to carry forward? The cold, necessary data that keeps you alive, or the warm, useless memory that makes life worth living? The question settled heavily in the air, a burden shared by every soldier who ever pretended to be someone they weren't in a letter home. I often wonder, what truth would you choose to write in your own final message, knowing that the map of your demise lay on the other side? Share your thoughts below about what truly anchors us when everything else is dissolving into dust. A distant flash split the horizon. Not the sound of an incoming shell, but the brief, sharp light of a signaling flare, too close, too specific. Elias instinctively snapped the fountain pen shut and slid the two written pages of the map under the straw bedding. The precision of the enemy map, which minutes ago had been a blank slate for introspection, suddenly became a vital, terrifying tool. The flare meant they were adjusting their line, likely preparing a probe, an attempt to test the resilience of the perimeter Elias was meant to hold. He crawled to the narrow slit overlooking the ravine, the heavy scent of spent powder clinging to the air. His mind instantly referenced the hidden data. The enemy usually launched probes from the heavily wooded cluster at coordinate 47 beta, exactly where the frozen creek bent sharply. If they moved now, they would expose themselves to the machine gun nest marked Kestrel, which he knew, thanks to the map, was currently manned by a half-asleep private named Jensen. The silence broke violently as a single, sharp rifle crack echoed, followed by a shouted warning in a language Elias barely recognized. He grabbed his rifle, adrenaline erasing the quiet melancholy of the letter. The map wasn't just paper anymore. It was a ghost whispering tactical advice. It told him where to aim, where they would retreat, and where the counterfire would originate. He thought of Clara, of the lemon biscuits, of the lonely lighthouse, and the strange, desperate love that fueled his urge to live. But now he was governed by the cold, precise language of the enemy, forced to use their knowledge against them, to let the map dictate his actions. He knew that if he survived the next hour, the words he had written to Clara would feel like a betrayal of the blood he would inevitably spill based on the geometry hidden on the map's other side. The skirmish was swift, brutal, and over within 10 minutes, leaving behind only the ringing silence and the metallic taste of ozone and fear. The enemy probe was repelled, thanks, ironically, to the intelligence provided by the dead lieutenant's cartography. Jensen, the half-asleep private, was wide awake now, shaken but effective. Elias returned to the damp interior of the post, his hands still trembling slightly, the recent burst of violence leaving him feeling profoundly hollowed out. He retrieved the pages. The battle had smudged a small corner of the top page, a streak of mud and perhaps something darker, covering the word memory in his description of the lighthouse. He looked at the mark, feeling that the real world had forcefully bled onto the page of his reflection. He knew he couldn't risk mailing the map as a whole. The tactical information was too sensitive, too dangerous if intercepted. He couldn't destroy the map, either, as the operational data was still required by command. But the letter, that small, essential piece of truth, had to survive. He carefully tore the written portion along the clean edge, separating the confession from the coordinates, the soul from the strategy. He sealed the two written pages inside a plain, official envelope, placing it deep inside his breast pocket, next to his identity tags. The enemy map, now mutilated and carrying a profound, hidden history, he returned to the lieutenant's belongings, ready to hand over as captured intelligence. He looked at the envelope, feeling a peculiar sense of peace. He had done the only thing he could do. He had ensured that his human truth, his essential spirit, was separated entirely from the apparatus of war. He survived the night, clutching the paper-thin boundary between the soldier he had to be and the brother he longed to remain. If this story of quiet desperation and the strange, haunting cost of survival touched your heart, Please subscribe to Quiet Soldier Stories and join us again next time for another look into the lives defined by the long, deep silence of conflict.